I welcome you. We have a quorum, so I'm starting the meeting in open session. Can I welcome members and advise members of the need to maintain social distancing during the meeting? And can I also provide a brief overview of the day's business? Today the committee will consider subordinate legislation and also receive a briefing by the Minister for Infrastructure. Can I advise members that due to some members joining the meeting remotely, it would be helpful if members use the hand up icon to register that they wish to speak or ask questions on any agenda item. Can I also ask members and witnesses, could they mute their mic when they are not speaking to allow everyone to hear the evidence and follow the meeting? Can I also advise members that we need to vacate the room by 1 p.m. at the latest, and request that members keep that in mind when asking questions. Agenda item number 1, have I any apologies? I've received none. No one indicating. Okay. Agenda item number 2, which is chairperson's business. Are the committee content that we write to Martina Anderson thanking her for her service and contribution to the committee?
Great.
Great. Okay. Also, and I've already outlined this, and I will say for Dolores' benefit, obviously she's just joined us, but we're going along the meeting with the Minister later, the briefing on themes, so they will be emailed to all members, so it's just to try to keep the questioning focused on the particular topic, rather than coming back to it continually throughout the meeting, so it will allow for a much more flowing meeting. So the clerk will email that in due time for members to take note of. Okay, so agenda item number 3, which is draft minutes. Can I turn members' attention to page 6, the draft minutes of the meeting on the 8th of September 2021. Are members content that the minutes are a true and accurate reflection? Agreed? Agreed, thank you, members. Okay, thank you, members. Can I now take you to agenda item number 4, which is matters arising, and turn members' attention to page 22, matters arising from the meeting on the 8th of September 2021. Can I ask members if there's any issues arising from the meeting? No one indicating. Can I turn members' attention to page 30, which is outstanding committee requests for information? For noting. And agenda item number 5, which is correspondence, and can I draw members' attention to the correspondence memo on page 37 of the meeting pack. Have members any issues within the correspondence that they'd like to raise? I don't see any. Just like to bring to members' attention, and you'll have seen this in your pack now over this past couple of weeks, at page 52, 55 and 79, we have a copy of correspondence to Lord Jay, Chair of the Protocol on Northern Ireland Subcommittee on aspects of implementing measures introduced by the European Commission. Many of these issues are very complex and may have very negative impacts. Where it's important that all elements of this are scrutinised. So, in line with that, would members be content that we also forward these pieces of information on to the department for their views, and also to the Executive Office with responsibility? Are members content with that proposed way forward?
I would be content. I mean, it's highlighting that there may be additional costs.
Correct.
In importing vehicles from GB into Northern Ireland in the future, and the extras may have to be put on them, so that this is an issue which could be a problem in the past, but it does indicate that to date the Executive hasn't commented on it.
Yeah, no, I think, Roy, you raise an important point. That's why I believe that a lot of these issues, that even though we're being copied into them as opposed to directly being corresponded with, that it is important that we put them on to the appropriate departments to ensure that there's proper scrutiny of the impact that they may have on the department's running, and indeed wider Northern Ireland society. So we're all content with that as a proposed way forward. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy that it is forwarded to the relevant departments. I think reading through the documentation received, an awful lot of this is about safety and about ensuring safety, and it's something I would welcome. So important to add that as a context around this.
Okay, thank you. Members have no further comments on that item. Could I also turn your attention to page 90, which is correspondence from the Belfast City Airport regarding support needed for the taxi industry. Now, we can discuss this now. but I am aware that it is on a theme that we will be discussing live with the Minister, so members may wish to hold their comments to there. So can I ask, is the committee content with the actions as suggested in the correspondence memo?
Can I just clarify, Chair? I posed the question to the taxi industry, what are they themselves doing, particularly in relation to recruitment and securing more drivers? I don't think we ever got a response to that at the session, and I wonder if we could write to representatives of the private taxi side and ask them what specific measures are they doing to entice new recruits into the industry.
Okay. Do we have a seconder for that proposal?
Yeah. Can I just add in relation to that? I think it's important to welcome the announcement, if we can come on to it obviously when the Minister comes in relation to last week around taxis, and there is a review of fares, and I think that's an important issue that has to occur, because in a number of sectors we're now seeing very clearly that the terms and conditions of employment are not attractive to attract people and retain people into the sector, and that's something that needs to be considered. It's not just taxis, it's also been in, for example, HGV drivers and stuff like that.
Yeah, okay, and I don't want to get into the detail of it because I think it will be a considerable point of discussion with the Minister, but absolutely the committee has agreed we'll write to the taxi representatives to ask what actions are being taken on their front. It's only right if we're asking the questions of the department that we hear the full picture, so absolutely no reason to not do that. Okay, so members are content with the actions as suggested. Sorry, we have someone online, do we?
Chair, no, my hand raised in the box, but it's just I'm happy enough to deal with this subject when the Minister comes in, especially in relation to the Belfast City Airport stuff. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think we don't want to prelude what the discussion will be with the Minister. Okay, agenda item number 6, which is subordinate legislation. SL1's not subject to Assembly procedure. Can I advise members that there are 4 proposals for statutory rules not subject to Assembly proceedings at page 91. The Department has provided maps for the 2 proposals that require them, and those are tabled. At page 92 and tabled at page 3, SL1, the Urban Clearways Amendment number 2 Order, Northern Ireland 2021. At page 94 and tabled at page 9, SL1, the Parking Places, Loading Bay and Waiting Restrictions, Downpatrick Amendment Order, Northern Ireland 2021. At page 96, SL1, Parking Places, Disabled Persons, Vehicles, Amendment number 7 Order 2021. At page 98, SL1, the Prohibition of U-Turns, Belfast Order, Northern Ireland 2021. Are members content to note the proposals for the statutory rules?
Content.
Thank you, members. So we now are on agenda item number 7, which is a briefing from the Minister of Infrastructure, and we will ask officials to please bring the Minister and officials into the meeting. And just as officials get settled, can I remind members that there are 4 pieces of correspondence from the Minister of Infrastructure from page 101, and tabled at page 13 is a departmental response to committee correspondences issued during the summer. So can I take the opportunity to welcome Minister Mallon to the committee, and indeed our officials. It's good to see you all with us. Obviously we have quite a number of issues that we'd like to discuss today, and I want to give the Minister the opportunity to open with remarks, and then we'll get in the way in which we intend to approach the meeting this morning to allow for efficiency of time as well. And we do appreciate you giving 2 hours to us this morning, but we intend to follow it on themes. So firstly, starting off with driving tests, MOTs, etc., going on then to the taxi plan, followed by that onto planning, and followed by that roads, resurfacing contracts and local issues after that. So that's indeed to try and help you also to ensure that we're not coming back and forward during the meeting. So without further ado, could I ask the Minister please to give us her opening remarks?
Thank you, Chair. And if I could begin by offering you and your party colleagues and obviously the friends and family of Councillor Paul Hamill my deepest sympathies. I didn't personally know Councillor Hamill, but from speaking to my own party colleagues who did, he was obviously held in very high regard, and so our thoughts and prayers are with you all at this difficult time.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, for the invitation to attend the committee today. I am accompanied by my Permanent Secretary, Katrina Godfrey, and the Chief Executive of the DVA, Jeremy Logan. If you are content, Chair, I just plan to take 10 minutes to update you on the work that I have been progressing since I last met with the committee, and of course following that I'm happy to answer any of your questions and appreciate you grouping them in the themes as you have outlined. We are all aware that responding to the ongoing pandemic remains challenging. Throughout the last year and a half, my department has continued to adapt to enable us to provide the essential services that the public rely on every single day. Throughout this time, my officials and I have continued to look ahead and consider how the department can best contribute to our recovery from COVID-19. While the financial and resource position across the department and right across the civil service is difficult, I am clear in my determination to do all that I can to deliver for our citizens. You will have recently received my department's business plan, which sets out my plan for the coming year. As you would expect, it is rooted in the Programme for Government Draft Outcomes Framework and supports the Executive's Building Forward Consolidated COVID-19 Recovery Plan. However, I cannot speak about the plans for the year without referencing the budget position and the implications this has for the services my department provides and the projects we are responsible for delivering. Our opening resource budget for 2021-22 is £429.9 million, which, excluding NI Water, is a flat cash position. This does not cover inflationary pressures and is therefore effectively a real terms cut. While I welcome the additional funding for Northern Ireland Water, in allocating the remainder of the opening budget, I have had to make difficult decisions and be proactive in reducing administrative budgets to maintain frontline service delivery. As part of June monitoring, bids totalling £36.7 million were submitted, including £27 million for TransLink, £7 million for winter service and routine roads maintenance, and £1.7 million for the Northern Ireland Water final determination. Unfortunately, of these, £2 million was received for roads maintenance and £1 million for Northern Ireland Water, and this leaves a substantial gap in my department's available resource. I can assure the committee, however, that I will continue to assess my department's financial position and I will continue to press for additional in-year funding. As the committee will be aware, budgets for future years are not yet agreed, but are likely to present a challenging financial position, and I will continue to engage with my executive colleagues. I know that officials from my department will be briefing you on the department's budget at a future committee session. Since becoming Minister, I have made it clear that tackling climate change is one of my top priorities. Extreme weather events that we have witnessed here recently and around the world are a stark wake-up call to the climate crisis and the immediate need to act to protect our environment. I am pleased that the Executive expressed its unanimous support for my proposal to hold a climate summit ahead of COP26. I believe this provides a crucial and timely opportunity to set out a radical action plan to deliver a just transition to net zero. I've also been very encouraged that so many stakeholders have been in touch to express their support for this work. While the real value will be added by the Executive working together, I am already progressing a number of initiatives within my department that I hope will be a catalyst for change. This year, I have committed £11 million of my £20 million Blue-Green Infrastructure Fund to active travel schemes delivered by my department and a further £2.5 million to assist councils in taking forward their Greenway projects. The recent publication of Making Belfast an Active City, Belfast Cycling Network 2021, which is a 10-year strategy with £100 million outlined in investment, is an important step towards my ambition to make Belfast a more people-focused city where greater provision and priority is made for walking, wheeling and cycling. And this is in addition to the new active travel infrastructure we are rolling out across all council areas right throughout Northern Ireland. I've also recently announced the rollout of Phase 2 of the part-time 20 miles per hour speed limits at 106 schools across Northern Ireland following the success of Phase 1. This takes the total number of schools benefiting to over 200, making a positive difference to so many young people's journeys to and from school. Members will know that my view is clear on the need to have a long-term vision and better strategic approach to the planning and delivery of wider infrastructure. This is essential to deliver inclusive and sustainable economic growth and enable us to ambitiously tackle the climate crisis. The committee is also familiar with the work and recommendations of the Ministerial Advisory Panel I established to look into this issue and the value and many benefits to be gained from an infrastructure commission here. I am pleased that this work and the engagement that I have undertaken with my executive colleagues has led to the establishment of an infrastructure commission being included as a key commitment in the executive's COVID recovery strategy. To progress this agreed action, I intend to establish a cross-departmental working group to determine the organisational and governance arrangements for the Commission. I hope to be in a position to bring the findings of this group to the Executive later this year. To deliver the change our society needs, we need to plan and we need to invest wisely. Members will not need me to rehearse the critical importance of investment in our water and wastewater infrastructure. Northern Ireland Water has recently embarked on a new price control, PC21, running from 2021 to 2026. The utility regulator has broadly endorsed Northern Ireland Water's PC21 business plan and has agreed a final determination calling for the investment of some £2 billion across the 6-year price control. A fully funded, multi-year budget is essential if Northern Ireland Water is to deliver on its PC21 business plan and provide the infrastructure that Northern Ireland so desperately needs to recover from this pandemic. From 2021 to 22, my department has allocated £129.5 million in resource and £215 million from my capital budget for Northern Ireland Water to start the new price control period and deliver the infrastructure that is required. This is positive, and I welcome the use of RRI borrowing. Finally, Chair, at my last appearance at the committee, many of your queries related to the services provided by the DVA. As such, I thought it would be helpful to provide you with a quick update. As you know, the DVA continues to work diligently to get all of its services back to what the customer expects. As a result of a series of actions taken by DVA, the capacity for conducting driving tests has increased. In the first 4 full months since driving tests resumed, it conducted 23,246 driving tests, which is almost 50% higher than the 5-year average for that period. This has been achieved by DVA by putting in place a wide range of measures to maximise the availability of tests, including the recruitment of additional examiners and the opening of new temporary test centres. DVA continues to offer driving tests on Saturdays and at certain centres on Sundays where it is suitable to do so without compromising the integrity of the test. Overtime is also used to allow off-shift dual-role driving examiners to provide further capacity. Private car driving test appointments are now released 5 months in advance, with all test centres set to release driving test appointments on the first working day of each month. Additional slots will also continue to be released as resources continue to become available. Additional capacity is also being provided in respect of LGV driving tests. For the first 4 full months since driving tests resumed on the 23rd of April, 1,290 LGV driving tests have been carried out, which is 65% higher than the 5-year average for the same period. Turning to vehicle testing, the DVA has again steadily increased its capacity by adopting a range of measures, including the recruitment of additional vehicle examiners and the use of overtime to provide additional cover. In August, the MOT rate was 98% of that compared to the pre-COVID period. As the DVA transitions back to its normal testing regime, it is experiencing a high demand, resulting in longer than normal appointment waiting times. And in some cases, customers may not be able to secure a vehicle test appointment before their current MOT expires. The DVA has consulted with the PSNI and the Association of British Insurers to make them aware of the current position. The PSNI has agreed not to penalise the driver of a vehicle whose MOT has expired, so long as the vehicle is in a roadworthy and safe condition, is properly insured, and the driver has proof of a test appointment booking for the vehicle. The Association of British Insurers' view is that not having a valid MOT certificate would not necessarily invalidate insurance, but recommends customers check their policy documents or speak to their insurer if they find themselves in this position. However, it is a condition of insurance that owners maintain their vehicles in a roadworthy condition. I would also take this opportunity, Chair, to remind owners and vehicles of all drivers that they are responsible under the law for the roadworthiness of their vehicle at all times. They should therefore continue to service their vehicles and carry out basic checks. In closing, Chair, I would again acknowledge and thank the staff across my department and in DBA, TransLink and Northern Ireland Water, who over the last 18 months have worked tirelessly, often in extremely difficult circumstances, to ensure that essential public services continue to be delivered. I hope that members have found that update helpful and informative, and I am of course happy to take any questions that committee members may have.
Okay. Thank you, Minister, for that comprehensive statement. Indeed, there's a lot there for the committee to consider and indeed mull over, not only now but in the weeks ahead. Your final topic is obviously our first topic of interest, which is MOT testing and also vehicle or learner driver testing. This is an issue that has caused considerable frustration among many service users across Northern Ireland who feel in a combination of not only COVID but indeed also the issue surrounding lifts has meant that the backlogs are just literally far too long, and therefore the waiting time much increased for many of them. So I wanted to first of all talk about driving tests and the backlog now. You did outline that additional examiners have been recruited. You've said about temporary test centres and additional slots, all of which is welcome in as far as trying to tackle the backlog. You talk about capacity being increased. Is the Minister in a position to tell us what the current backlog as of today is?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And I mean, as you have rightly outlined, we, under DVA, provide a very high volume in terms of the service that's required. It's public facing and it was closed for a considerable period of time in respect of driving tests. If we take a step back and look at the overall picture, pre-COVID, 1.2 million vehicles would have been coming forward for MOT, 60,000 driving tests were booked each year. So of course when you close a service for such a prolonged period of time, there will be a backlog. But what we have tried to do is, I suppose, threefold step on our action plan. The first is to maximise capacity, and as you have rightly identified, we've taken a number of steps to do that, and Jeremy, I'm sure, can go into the further detail of that. We're also working hard to minimise disruption to our customers, and that's why I'm very pleased that through the efforts that have been put in place, we are carrying out almost 50% more tests for the period than we would have been doing pre-COVID, which I think is a substantial achievement. And then the third, and it comes not last, because it certainly isn't least, is that we continue within that to do everything that we can to keep both our customers and our staff safe, because of course we are still in the midst of this pandemic. But in addition to the measures that I have outlined, I'm sure Jeremy can go into further detail in respect of capacity building.
So you've said, obviously, and I appreciate that comment, 50% higher than the 5-year average, but we still have a backlog. So is the Minister or our officials in a position to tell us what the current backlog in driving tests are at present?
Yeah, so this is an issue that we've discussed before at committee, and it's not possible to give a definitive number because, as you appreciate, people continue to take their theory tests and people continue to make applications or withdraw from their appointments of driving tests. Of course, people who go through their theory test don't necessarily automatically apply for a driving test because they want a sustained period, prolonged period, where they can take lessons, or maybe their circumstances just don't permit it. So it's not possible to give a definitive number on the backlog, but I know that members' concern previously was that we wouldn't be able to even meet our pre-COVID levels in terms of testing. What we have achieved is we're not just meeting our pre-COVID testing levels, we're actually doing 50% more of that because of the measures that we have put in place. So of course people will still have to wait a longer time than they would have, and I apologise for that because I understand how frustrating it is, particularly for young people who are very keen to get their driving test. But I want to reassure people right across Northern Ireland that the statistics demonstrate we are doing everything we can to be maximising the capacity to be eating into that backlog.
Okay, I would like to push towards some form of figure, because I do know when testing resumed in April, there were over 22,000 people with a theory test who had booked a practical. So there is certain information in which the department can provide us with, which will give an indication as to what the backlog looks at present. Is the department minister or indeed officials in a position to give me an indicate number of how many are in the backlog at present? I understand the statistics, you know, about capacity is higher, but I would like to know how that's impacting on the backlog as to the overall number.
Well, I can pass over, but it's just to reinforce that in the first full 4 months since driving tests resumed, 23,246 driving tests have been conducted. So I think it's important just to contextualise the fact that it was closed for several months. There was a backlog. Huge volume of driving tests have been carried out, 50% more than we would pre-pandemic, while having mitigations in place to keep people safe. But of course, I'll hand over to Katrina or Jeremy on the wider issues that you've touched on.
I think the point around backlog is an issue that we talked about before at committee. The 22,000 figure was the number at that point in time who had a valid theory test pass certificate that could apply for a driving test. Our focus has rightly been on delivering driving tests to reduce the demand. And to do that, we've taken a range of measures, as the Minister has mentioned in her opening statement. We have 38 full-time driving examiners across the network and 43 dual-role driving examiners, and that is a facility that is unique to DVA, that we can use those dual-role examiners to deliver both vehicle tests and driving tests. And over the summer period, we have certainly been using that resource as much as we can to start to address the demand and the ongoing demand for driving tests. We have also been bringing forward training for new dual-role examiners, and indeed 5 have successfully completed their training and are now conducting Category B tests. Unfortunately, not everybody does pass the test, and it's a 4 to 5 week training programme. So of the 8 trained, 5 were successful, 3 were not. So we're not reducing the integrity of the testing in terms of the driving examiner training. In addition, the 31 dual-role examiners accepted temporary promotion opportunity up to the end of September that allows them to deliver driving examinations full-time. Again, another step that we have taken to address the backlog, and the figures support that we have maintained consistently that level of increased driving tests. I know the committee were concerned that when we were last here, the figures for May were around 35% increase for that month, and they were concerned that this could be maintained and sustained over that period, which it has been. We're still recruiting additional temporary and permanent examiners for vehicle examiners, and that allows us to free up that dual role resource. And in parallel, we have 2 substantive competitions going now for permanent vehicle examiners and indeed permanent driving examiners. But that is a long recruitment process. It's a 5-stage recruitment process for driving examiners that starts, with an aptitude test, interview, and then they have to do special driving tests themselves before they can undertake the training. It's a skilled area of work. So those recruitment competitions are progressing, and we expect to see those full-time examiners coming in November, which will coincide then with the dual role examiners going back to deliver vehicle testing.
So just to clarify, Jeremy, when you were last at the committee in July, you talked about 10 additional examiners that were being brought online. Of that 10, how many are operational today?
The full-time examiners, that recruitment competition is ongoing, so we expect the first of those 10, there will be 6 brought forward for training in October. We expect the first 6, assuming they pass the test, that they will start delivering driving tests in November. Now, in addition, we have brought 5 additional dual role examiners forward to deliver driving tests, and we're using that temporary promotion opportunity that we put in place right at the start to deliver and maximise the number of driving tests they can deliver.
Do we have statistics which show how individual test centres are dealing with the backlog? Because, for example, in my own constituency in Craigavon, which is the largest outside Belfast, I have numerous reports telling me that there is one examiner in operation at a time, which, given the backlog, is never going to get on top of it if we have one examiner when others are based and being drawn to places such as Cookstown or further west. Do you have any information on that or any statistics surrounding individual test centres?
Sure, maybe if I could on that. We've received requests for specific data relating to individual test centres, and we've taken advice from the Information Commissioner, and we're advised not to be able to release that. What I can assure you, though, is that Craigavon is our second highest performing test centre in terms of the volume of driving tests that are being carried out. Okay,
thank you. Okay, and I want to move on to other members, but just before I do, is there an indication of the rough waiting time for MOT tests at present?
The rough waiting time? At the minute, we run those figures, and they need to be taken with a degree of caution, because you can run them weekly and then you can run them over a period of time. I wouldn't want to give the committee information that I couldn't stand over at this point in time. Certainly, the Minister has mentioned that our capacity and what we are delivering, the figures for August are indeed promising. That we're up to around 98% of what we normally deliver in terms of the vehicle testing. But as we transition, obviously, and we still operate under COVID controls in our test centres, it is going to take time to get back up to our full capacity. And we are taking a number of measures, again, as the Minister's mentioned, around recruiting additional examiners, and we're operating our centres on Sundays and indeed bank holidays to address the demand. And we're starting to see those figures coming back in terms of the MOT testing. The engagement that we had with the police was to alleviate concerns from the public that if they couldn't get a test within 2 or 3 weeks of their expiry date, that they would not be unduly penalised through no fault of their own at the roadside. And certainly we have been communicating that message very clearly for the last number of weeks to try and ease any concerns that there would be out there.
Okay, and do we have an average waiting time at present?
I don't have the average waiting time with me now.
We can provide that to you.
I would appreciate that. I think the committee needs informed of that. Okay.
And Chair, just before I move on to other members, I have been challenging DVA on this, because it is a high volume public facing service, and there have been a number of measures that they've put in place, and I think we are making significant achievements as demonstrated by the statistics. But of course, if the committee has other suggestions about how we could better improve the capacity, I would of course be willing to hear from them, and we can examine them. Okay.
And finally, from me, in relation to DVA, and you do notice in terms of your accountability towards the organisation, given the pressures that DVA faced with COVID and backlogs and MOT lifts, can the Minister outline what additional financial resource have been allocated towards DVA in relation to dealing with these problems, and what bids have been made in-year monitoring rounds at the Executive over the past year in relation to this?
Yeah, so we have been making bids on a number of occasions to the Executive, recognising the financial pressures that DVA have been operating under. Unfortunately, none of those bids have been successful. Katrina can go into the detail, but of course I will continue to do so. And while I've yet to receive the full information from my officials in respect of October monitoring round, my intention would be to continue to make that bid, given the severe financial impact that it has had on DVA's operations.
Okay. If that could be supplied to me in relation to the bids, that would probably be more prudent as opposed to getting into the detail now. But I'm
just going to add, Chair, as the Minister says, where it's been appropriate, we have made bids, particularly with an eye to DVA's reserves. Obviously, because it operates as a trading fund, there are very strict rules around the costs it has to cover itself, and if it's helpful, I'm sure Jeremy could go into those, but it is just a factor to take into consideration. Okay. It's got a very specific governance arrangement approved by the Assembly. The trading fund presents both opportunities and constraints, and it's really important that we operate within those.
Okay, and I'll go now to members, so I'll start with the Vice Chair, David Hillage, and then members can indicate as appropriate.
I'm fine.
You're fine? Okay, so we'll go now with Cathal.
Thank you, Chair, and could I welcome the Minister and our officials to the committee this morning. Just a couple of key points, Chair, and quick points. In June, the Minister said that there was 13,500 Category B tests in the system, not people who are waiting to do their tests. Can the Minister outline now how many people's in the system now? That's one question. And in relation to the MOT validations, and I know Jeremy had answered some of this part of this question earlier on, but in terms of those people who can't book and their validation runs out, in terms of communication from the department and reminders, what's the time frame in relation to that? Because I know there was a communication problem in relation to those people trying to book earlier on in the year. So, I mean, has that, where are we in terms of trying to resolve all of that in terms of MOTs?
Sorry, Mr. Boylan, I didn't catch your first question, because the figure that I outlined in my speaking note was that we had carried out over 23,000 driving tests. I'm not sure. I thought you'd said 13.
Yeah, repeated, Chair. Just in June, there was 13,500 Category B tests in the system in June, and also referring to the other point of the question in relation to there was supposed to be 10 new full-time examiners. That's the information we got in June from the department. I'm just wondering, there's 13,500 in June. How many is there now in the system in terms of booked in the system for testing?
Okay, maybe hand back to Jeremy on that, because a number of those issues were covered. I don't know if there's maybe a difficulty just in the audio, but I'll hand over to Jeremy. And just on the issue of communication, we have been working very closely with the PSNI and the Association of British Insurers. We have been putting out press statements and taking opportunities, particularly in response to media requests again, to be highlighting the situation, the process, and giving people reassurance if they're not able to get an MOT test, as long as they're assured that their vehicle is in a roadworthy condition. And we've also been cascading the messages on social media as well, Mr. Boylan. But I'll hand back over to Jeremy on the
figure of 13,500 from memory was the number of bookings that were in the system at that point in time, and as you'll appreciate that position fluctuates on a regular basis as new resource becomes available and additional slots are put into the system. It's not an official statistic. What I can tell you is that the booking for driving tests is open now on a 5-month period, and at the start of each month we will release appointments for the following month. And the uptake, as you would expect, is quite significant for that, albeit there does remain slots available, a small number of slots available in January. But as you can imagine, on the first of each month there is a significant demand for those services. So that figure, I don't have an up-to-date figure, but there are thousands of tests booked in the system between now and the end of January. The point that you made around MOTs and the reminders and the advice that we give to our customers, we have that information available on NI Direct. We also have our call handlers that give out that information for anybody that calls the NI Direct or indeed our online our call centre for the booking service. We have also included a fact sheet within the reminder notice that goes out to each customer that gives them that information around the position with regard to the PSNI and indeed the assurance of British insurers and what they need to do to try and book the appointment at the earliest point of time. So that is a direct communication now with each customer who receives their reminder notice for an MOT.
Okay. Are you happy enough, Cahill?
Yeah, Chair. The Minister to try and... The Minister was saying earlier on about how we can work together with the Minister to try and address some of the issues. We would need some of the figures, Chair, to try and find out that. I'd appreciate if we could get some figures in terms of the numbers that are in the system now, because if we are going to address it as a committee, we would need to try and get some figures if it could.
Okay, thank you. That point has been noted. Could I go to Roy Beggs?
Okay. Thank you for your introduction, Minister. And indeed to DVA staff for the efforts that they're making. There has been a significant increase in testing. I appreciate that. And staff have been working evening and weekends, but they can only do that for so long. And I'm actually concerned that there is still a considerable backlog. And mention has been made of a 5-stage process, and the new driver testing people that were promised before the summer, they aren't even recruited yet. I'm just concerned that there's a lack of urgency in this matter to bring on additional staff to deal with the problem. Is it going to be 2 years before the backlog is addressed? And in particular, a constituent advised me of trying to get on the website to look at a test on Monday. Number 440 on the queue. Took 32 minutes to access the website, not even to book the test, to access the website. There is huge pressure here, and I don't see movement at senior management and frankly at ministerial level. We need to do something to prove it. There is a crisis. We have a just-in-time industry and a shortage of drivers. In the United Kingdom, it's estimated there's been an increase from 45,000 to 76,000 vacancies. So with Brexit, COVID, all adding to problems, and Eastern European drivers who we were heavily reliant on having gone home.
Yeah,
so my question that I'm coming to is, what are we actually going to do in Northern Ireland to address this problem, which is resulting in gaps in our supermarket shelves? There'll be additional pressures coming up to Christmas with the additional transportation that happens, and there will be disruption to industry. And in England, they've dispensed with the car and light trailer driver, which is freeing up examiners to do the more important HGV where there's huge pressures. And they're also putting in flexibilities to remove the necessity to carry out staged licensing. So if you need an HGV driver, you can have them tested for an HGV heavy goods vehicle test, not having to go through numerous other tests that they're not actually going to drive. So what are we doing at a management and minister level to assist your staff, to assist the economy and the needs?
Thank you, Mr Beggs. And first of all, thank you for acknowledging the tireless work of DBA staff and management. They have been working tirelessly under very difficult and challenging circumstances. I also would have to respectfully reject any assertion that we're not dealing with this with any sense of urgency. This has been a key priority for me. It has been a key priority for the Permanent Secretary, and it's been an absolute key priority for Jeremy and the team. And the efforts that they have gone to and the additional measures that they've put in to enhance capacity is demonstrated by the statistical information that's available about the number of tests that are being carried out. I am as frustrated as anyone else at the backlog, but the backlog is a reality of a pandemic that necessitated the closure of all driving testing to keep people and customers safe. And that inevitably resulted in a significant backlog, which we are working hard to try to tackle, trying to minimise disruption to our customers and also ensure that we're continuing to have mitigations in place to keep them safe. And we will continue to keep a very close eye on this and maximise capacity where we can. And that's why I've said if there are things that we are not doing that are possible and practical, then absolutely I would like to hear from the committee because I want to work with you on it. In relation to the HGVs, the HGV situation is one that doesn't, as you rightly identify, pertain solely to Northern Ireland. It is a result of the working terms and conditions, which is being recognised by some of the big employers. It is absolutely, as you have rightly identified again, to do with Brexit. The issue of testing, which falls under the remit of DVA, as we said, and I said in my opening remarks, we are carrying out 65% more testing of HGVs than we were pre-COVID for the same period. We recognise that this is an issue, and so my department has approached the Department for the Economy to ask are there any apprenticeship schemes that could be utilised to help support the LGV industry. So we're engaging on that, even though it doesn't fall within the remit of the department. And we are continuing to what we can do to maximise our testing capacity. So we're offering Saturdays and Sundays. To date, we haven't had as big an uptake of that offer as we would have anticipated. In respect of the issue of the trailers that you've identified, we only became aware of this after those changes were announced. We had no prior knowledge of them. Of course, officials will look at it, but I think it's important to point out that Logistics UK has highlighted their concern about this move on the grounds of road safety. I've also been contacted, and my department has been contacted by a number of people across Northern Ireland, including elected representatives, who are concerned about the impact, the adverse impact that it might have on a number of businesses here. So, of course, we will look at this, but I have to also be very mindful of the road safety implications in that as well.
My specific question is about speeding up the recruitment of additional driving testers. Is that something you will look at? Because it does seem to be exceptionally slow, and we've been told there's a 5-stage process and it'll take some time. I mean, we were pressing on this issue before the summer, and I'm shocked that we don't have additional testers in place 2 months later, I have to say. And the issue of staging of drivers, so you actually test the driver for the lorry they're going to drive rather than for other lorries they're not going to drive.
Okay, well, I can hand over to Jeremy or Katrina on some of the operational side of that. But it's a hugely important job teaching somebody to drive or teaching somebody to drive a lorry. Because we know how dangerous it is to be on our roads. So we can never compromise the integrity of that. What we do is we are trying to do what we can in the quickest possible time frame, but while we were unable due to public health advice and the scale of the pandemic to carry out driving tests, we were also prohibited from carrying out the training that was required to have driving examiners in place. So of course it is an outworking of the pandemic, but we will continue to do what we can without compromising the integrity, given the important role that driving examiners have. I don't know if Jeremy or Katrina wish to add anything else.
Briefly, because I have other members to come in here.
Just to add to the Minister's assurance, we have worked very closely with NICS HR, which obviously does all of the recruitment for the civil service. They are in no doubt about the urgency, as the Minister says, as soon as it was safe and possible for testing to be carried out and the recruitment process to get underway. Jeremy and his team had it underway But it is a detailed process. There are very good reasons, as the Minister has mentioned, why it has to be a detailed process. We need people who have the exact level of competence and ability to teach other people to drive, and that process, Jeremy, is well in hand. There has been no stage that has been held up unduly, and
No, that's correct,
as you say,
Katrina.
we are on course to complete all of the stages.
We're at that final stage of the process in terms of making formal offers in for the training, which is due to commence in October, in the next couple of weeks indeed. As I say, the 5-stage process, in terms of the quantum of it, to give you some sort of scale, there was 150 applicants for it, and they had to be sifted down for interview, and then through that interview process, which panels have to be set up, as you can appreciate, there's logistics and time associated with that, and then the special driving test, which is a 90-minute test for any of those candidates that we would bring forward then for training, to ensure that we have some surety that they will actually, make the grade as a driving examiner at the end of that investment in training. And as I earlier pointed out, not everyone will, which is one of the unfortunate things, but we will not compromise the integrity of our training to bring those driving examiners forward. So that process, unfortunately, is dictated by the timescales, and we work very closely with Nick's HR to ensure that we can deliver that as quickly as we can. So I am, very hopeful that at the end of that training we will have at least 6 new examiners come forward, full-time examiners come forward, and that will obviously augment then the driving examiner resource that we have and the dual role resource that have done so much over the summer period to increase our testing capacity.
Okay, thank you. Right, we're going to move on to another question. Dolores.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Minister and colleagues and team for your presentation. Can I ask, though, I welcome the fact that in all of this we're not compromising the integrity of the road test, because the road safety is, of course, of paramount importance to us all. And I welcome Mr Begg's belated acknowledgement of the impact of Brexit on delivery of goods and indeed on the availability of a European labour force. A wee bit late, however. But can I ask then, Minister, you said during your presentation about the budget, and the Chair referred to the budget in terms of tests, but given that Boris Johnson has now ditched both the bridge and the tunnel, and the executive and indeed I think the British government have recognised, as many other nations across the globe recognise, the importance of infrastructure as a main driver for the economy post-COVID. I just wonder what. I think it's scandalous indeed that you're at a flat rate budget. I think it's incredible. So, has there been any further commitment from the British government, indeed the Treasury, where money might be ring-fenced for infrastructure here?
And I would just caveat that, can we please try to keep to the subject matter, because we will be coming on to budget matters further down the list. So
sure.
we'd appreciate that.
Just to answer that very succinctly, I was pleased that we got confirmation that the distraction of a £20 billion fixed bridge or 3 tunnels and a roundabout under the sea has finally been put to bed. This was a bridge that was estimated to cost £20 billion, and we all know around this table what we could do for infrastructure and for our communities with £20 billion. The truth is that the British government and Boris Johnson have signed up to a number of infrastructure commitments in New Decade, New Approach. It was Boris Johnson who wanted the terminology to turbocharge our infrastructure in New Decade, New Approach, and I continue to make engagements with ministerial counterparts in the British government to press on them to realise that commitment. As recently even as last week, I met with the Future Transport Minister, Rachel McLean, to talk about decarbonisation of transport, the electricity charging infrastructure, and how we can secure funding for that. So I will continue to do what I can to secure the funding that has been promised. Okay,
Minister, we're veering off the topic of subject, but we'll come back to it. It's part of the agenda list. So I will come back to the member whenever we've dealt specifically now with DVA and testing. We now have a subject matter of taxis to get to, but we will be coming back to budgetary matters, in which if the member wishes to come back.
But just on testing, I'm sure all members here get heartfelt pleas from people who failed their test and then have to go to the back of the queue. I just wonder, has that been re-examined as an issue in which there may be a different way of dealing with it? I understand the dynamics involved, but it is something that many people feel very, very strong and hurt about, I have to say.
And I can absolutely understand that on a personal level. I suppose the system with the early booking for people who have been waiting the longest time, and the approach that we've taken throughout is to try to be as fair as possible. And so I understand why someone who has failed their test is frustrated that they can't get a test straight away. But equally, there is someone who has yet to sit their test and has applied. And so what we're trying to do is to have a system that is equal and fair. And that's why we're working as hard as we can to carry out as many tests as possible so that we're maximising the opportunities for everyone to get a driving test when they need it. And hopefully, that they will then pass.
Okay, and I echo those sentiments. I think that is an important question. I think in closing this session, I would also agree with Roy Begg's comment in relation to, we've watched with interest the change in rules in England with the driver and vehicle standard agencies in relation to the change in rules for towing a trailer or caravan with a car without taking a test, and how that might help free up some capacity space. And I understand that the Minister said that she was not given prior notice of this, but it is something that they will be considering. They may not have come to a conclusion or decision, but this committee would be very interested in that conversation going forward. So can the Minister confirm to the committee today that this is under active consideration by the Department? Yeah, so when we became aware, this is what we do all the time. We're constantly looking across these islands to see what is being done and how it's improving citizens' lives and improving business opportunities. So of course we will look at this. And we will examine it in terms of the road safety perspective, and of course we will have engagement too with the road haulage industry as well. Okay, thank you. So moving on to our second topic, members, and I would ask please to keep to the point, which is the taxi industry. Now I know the Minister did release a recent statement on that. She will know the committee's prior interest to that. They brought a committee motion. So I'll go to the Vice Chair to lead off on the taxi question.
Thanks, Chair, and do very welcome, Minister, this morning. Refer to obviously the statement that the Chair has alluded to there. Would that not have been better coming forward as a statement to the House here rather than going through media first? Would members should have been maybe involved via the House on that?
Yep, no, I reflect on that point. I suppose my urgency here is about trying to get measures in place to support the taxi industry, and we've been engaging with them throughout the pandemic, and it's been very clear that they are saying that they are struggling to cope as we emerge from this pandemic. So the focus has been on ensuring that we can get measures in place and we can get them implemented as quickly as possible, and that any changes that are required we can get in. I'm thinking of the consultation on the fare review, for example, that we can make sure that any changes on the fare can be implemented in time for Christmas, which would obviously be taxi drivers' busiest periods.
Clearly, obviously, numbers have been falling steadily over a period of time, even before the COVID situation had arisen. With some correspondence here from the George Best City Airport this morning as well, supporting the taxi drivers and how they see the difficulties panning out for them with the lack of taxi drivers. There are complex issues and difficulties and problems with the delay in getting people through the system as such. And what can be done to change that sort of cumbersome outlook, as they would look at it, to try and speed things up to get drivers back on the road again, or more so maybe even new drivers involved in the industry?
Thank you, and I know that you have been a continuous advocate for taxi drivers right throughout this, and I want to acknowledge that. In recognition of the concerns that were being expressed by taxi drivers about the lack of new drivers coming forward, that's why I've announced the measure that any new drivers that go on to pass their test will not have to pay a fee. The fee will be white, and that's to encourage new drivers into the industry. Taxi drivers also have articulated to me that they feel that it is very unfair that there hasn't been a recent review of fare prices, and that's why I'm launching the consultation on that, and the outcome of that will be implemented in time for Christmas. I've been very clear with officials on that. That's what I want to see happening, so we hope that will address that issue.
And will that supersede the 2008 Taxi Act, the fares maximised there?
Yeah, so it will require taxi meters to be changed, and what we're saying is to help every single taxi driver. If there's a fare change, I will be waiving the meter test fee for every single taxi driver so that they're not financially penalised for a decision that we take in terms of a fare increase or otherwise. So that's again to help existing taxi drivers, because I know a number of the taxi drivers have said, right, you're trying to help new drivers into the industry, but what about the help for existing drivers? That's why I've offered the financial packages that we did, which was assistance of some £16.7 million, and that's why I'm making sure existing taxi drivers are able to avail of the measure of the free meter test as well. I'm not aware of any delays in terms of testing for taxi drivers, but I'm happy to defer to Jeremy if that's not correct. Our understanding is that under the system, if a driver needs a taxi driving test, that they are able to get it in a timely fashion.
Yeah, the management of taxi driver tests would be different from a Category B test from a driving perspective, but there's no issue that I am aware of or any impediment through the theory testing process or the practical test or indeed the licensing team why taxi licence can't be progressed within normal timescales.
Right, I'll certainly go back to those who raised that with me and
Yeah, please
have
do.
a look at that. Yeah, yes, I will indeed,
Contact me.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair. Could I go now to Liz Kimmins?
Thank you, Chair, and welcome the Minister and officials this morning. It's just, I suppose it's really around the taxi operators, and I mean, locally I've been contacted by some of the taxi operators in Uri who are really struggling at this stage and are continuing to lose more staff due to capacity issues and obviously the stress and burden that it's putting on to staff. So, I mean, I was just wondering then, has there been any further progress in terms of operator support? For those operators that are really having a difficulty, because it's not that there's a shortage of work, they really can't cope with what's been thrown at them, and then obviously that's having an impact on staff and their own health and well-being and all sorts.
Thank you, Ms Kimmins. In respect of the taxi operators, during the pandemic and the financial assistance schemes that were brought forward by the Executive, taxi operators were able to avail of the Department for Economy scheme. In respect of the assistance that I've been trying to provide, when we had the engagement initially with the taxi operators and the taxi drivers, the taxi operators had said that they were keen that we could get a grant that would put money directly into the pocket of the taxi driver, because that would inadvertently help them. We also have continued to engage with taxi operators and taxi drivers, and as you rightly identify, the issue now is not one of a shortage of work. In fact, the taxi operators are overwhelmed with the demand for work. It's that they have a shortage of drivers. That's why I've announced the measure where we are going to waive the fee to encourage new drivers into the industry, because the taxi operators and taxi drivers themselves were saying that the fees, DVA fees, was one of the obstacles to encouraging new drivers into the system. So that's why we have taken that decision. In respect of that engagement, taxi operators also highlighted the issue around the fare review as well. And so the two measures that we've introduced and the fact that we'll be wiping the meter fees for any taxi driver should also work to help the industry get more drivers in and will inevitably help taxi operators as well.
Thank you. And I suppose the only other thing is around the COVID restrictions for drivers, but I mean, obviously that's something that is currently under, is constantly under review, because it limits, I suppose, what they can do as well. So I think that's something just to note in relation to that too. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And the issue of restrictions and the easements of restrictions across the board, is in line with the public health advice, and it is something that the Executive keeps under continual review.
Okay, thank you. Go to Cahill now.
Thanks, Chair, and I do apologise, Chair, and the Minister, the audio sometimes doesn't be that great, but Minister, just following on, and I appreciate the work, and it goes out to all those within the sector who has helped out through this past 18 months has been very challenging for all of us. Just in relation to two things, I mean, is there anything else or anything you can do for them or for the assist the taxi industry other than what's provided now? And also, could you expand a wee bit in terms of the taxi review? Because I know that many were calling out for the taxi review. You mentioned the fare review. Is there any other plans to look at the taxi review in light of what has happened now and the challenges that they have faced in COVID? Thank you.
And just to add to that as well, Minister, if you could, in the last question on this topic, the committee motion made reference to many of the changes in which you've implemented, which we're grateful for, and we think it'll help the industry. The one specific issue that wasn't addressed was the complexity in testing, which was highlighted continually to the committee by the industry. If you can give us some information as to why that hasn't been taken forward at this stage, and would it be still an active consideration going forward, given that there's a large number of young potential new employees in the industry that feel that it is so complex that they can't get into it because of testing?
So thank you both. We have been very focused on a department. The first thing was around getting money into the pockets of taxi drivers when we were in lockdown because of the impact on their workload. And now we're acting to ensure that we can support them through recovery, and that is the objective of the measures that I've announced. On the issue of an overriding review of the Taxi Act, what we have focused very much on in the department is getting support as quickly as possible to the industry. And I'm very mindful as well that we don't have much time left in this mandate and that it may actually, regrettably, be cut short. Even shorter than that. So we're very focused on getting measures in place to help the industry. The issue that has been raised is one around the training, and Chair, I think that's the issue that you're referring to, and I can bring in Jeremy, but this is 35 hours of training over 5 years, and it's about disability awareness training, and these are aspects that I think are important. So this is an issue that I have been looking at, but the difficulty that we have is that we have to maintain the high standards that we see in our taxi industry. We have to make sure that it's safe, and often they are carrying very vulnerable customers. So those are the considerations, that it's 35 hours, not in 1 year, it's 35 hours over a 5-year period, and it's trying to get that balance of not being too cumbersome on taxi drivers, but making sure that, you know, the disability awareness training is there and the other aspects. I'm happy to bring in Jeremy on the...
Before you do, I give the example of just last week I had a constituent that came to me to say that he's a bus driver, 80-seater bus or whatever, and he said that to apply to become a taxi driver, he needs to go through a licensing process again, and he can't understand why, if he can drive a bus capable of carrying 80 people, why the testing would be so complex to drive a 3-seater taxi.
Yeah, I'm happy to...
I think in terms of the consultation, when there was the review of the regulations at the last time in July 2013, there was an overwhelming response, you know, in terms of the taxi driving test and the periodic training to maintain professional standards within the taxi industry. And over 99% of respondents at that stage agreed that the taxi driver test, you know, was the right way to go. And 69% agreed to the proposal to introduce the practical test and the theory test for new drivers, as well as periodic training for all drivers. We did conduct a review in DVA in 2017 to see why some of the issues around the taxi theory test were manifesting themselves, and we took into consideration further interventions that could support new entrants into the industry, including reducing the band score of some of the theory test, aligning the test pass rates with bus and lorries, providing improved materials and practice papers, and better signposting candidates to areas where we believed and the figures showed that they were performing poorly. So those interventions did take place, but I think that the issue is we need to maintain the standard of entry into the taxi industry, and that's why, you know, we will, you know, continue with the taxi driving test and the periodic training.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so our next topic, and we have caught up on time, which is good as well, is planning. This is a particular interest area for the committee and will be going forward. It is one of the most outward-facing elements of the political arena. So can I ask what the Minister's assessment is of the Department's performance to date in dealing with regionally significant planning applications?
Yep. Chair, as you rightly identify, planning is key. It's key to house building, it's key to economic recovery, and of course it's key in terms of sustainable development. There is no secret of the fact, and I've said this before, that we should be much better in terms of processing applications. The Department has undertaken a number of strands of work to achieve those improvements. There is a cross-departmental forum specifically focused in on improving consultee response times, which is an issue. The member may also be aware of the planning portal, which is about digitisation and streamlining so that all users can have a similar experience and are able to upload and engage with the system from wherever they are. And then a key component for me is one around community engagement. Planning decisions shape local communities, and it is absolutely critical that local communities feel that they can navigate that system, which is why I've engaged community places to carry out community partnership working as well to try to address that. So there is room for improvement. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. There are a number of work streams in place to do that, and it is something that I'm very much focused on, particularly as we emerge from the pandemic. This has been an issue over many years, and we need to do as much as we can to improve the system without compromising the integrity of the system as well.
Okay, so I'm glad the Minister recognises the challenges there and recognises that the Department must do much better. But how would we define much better? The Minister knows that the current target for responses on an application for a regionally significant application is 30 weeks. There is some planning applications, regionally significant planning applications, that are in the system, the Department for Infrastructure system, for close on 200 weeks. Now, I'm sure the Minister doesn't find that acceptable. I certainly don't find it acceptable. If we are going to be drivers of economic development and recovery, how is this an advertisement for inward investment? Because this is very much sometimes the first hurdle that many investors experience in the planning system. So can I ask the Minister, how will she get a grip of those regionally significant applications that have long since passed the time in which a decision should have been made to allow certainty in those areas and indeed for those potential employers?
Yeah, and I should have added that in addition to those work streams, we're also carrying out a review of the Planning Act as well, which will be an important component in terms of improving the system as well. There are a number of dimensions to this, Chair. There's one around the quality of applications that are submitted in the first instance. And you'll be aware of the improvements that we undertook in terms of pre-application discussion process as well to try to improve that. But there still is an issue around the quality, and then subsequent information and updated information being continually sent through that then has to be reanalysed, which then takes time. So all of that is building in. As I says, one of the big areas that needs improvement is consultee response times, and that's why the cross-departmental working group, which is led by senior official in my department, and maybe Katrina wants to come in on that, is working hard to improve that area. But I recognise that we need to get better at planning and delivery of infrastructure, and that's why I've been pushing for the establishment of an infrastructure commission here, because these are the areas that it would look like, and it would be much more strategic and improve the overall system as well. So I want to assure the Chair that within the department we have a number of work streams, but overarching in terms of the strategic approach, this is one of the reasons why I've been pushing for the infrastructure commission to be established here. Okay. I don't know if you want to come in on
one such application, which is regional significance and one that has been in the public domain, in which you've commented on quite considerably in your time both as a member and also as a minister, is ARC 21. So I understand that you had requested an assessment from DAERA. Are you in a position to tell the committee, has that been forthcoming, and if and when you would be in a position to make a decision on ARC 21? Yep.
Well, the member will be aware that I've made decisions on a number of very significant and economically and otherwise regionally significant applications. There was a North-South interconnector casement. There has been a number in respect of renewable energy applications as well. So since becoming minister, I've made a number of important decisions that have been sitting in the system for some time. Regrettably, we didn't have ministers in place for 3 years to be able to take planning decisions as well, which has been difficult. In respect of ARC 21, again, it's another hugely controversial and complex application, and the analysis from DAERA in terms of demand is an important material planning consideration. My officials are working at pace to process that application so that they can get a recommendation up to me at the earliest opportunity, because of course I recognise that this is an issue that has been around a long time, and all involved want to have certainty in terms of decision. So as soon as I'm in a position to be able to receive the recommendation, I of course will give it very careful consideration in line with my statutory responsibilities as the Minister responsible for planning, so that we can have clarity and certainty going forward.
Okay, and absolutely. And do we have any indicative timings as to when you expect that decision to be made?
Well, as soon as all of the statutory processes are completed and completed appropriately, then officials will submit a recommendation to me for decision. Okay,
and finally, and I think other members will be coming in on this one, is we received quite a bit of correspondence, particularly the rural members, about the new planning guidance in relation to planning in the countryside, and how this has caused confusion in terms of interpretation of policy. Would the Minister like to set out the record of actually what the intention of that guidance was, And has it been correctly or incorrectly interpreted by many that it is a threat to that PPS 21 as it is currently interpreted?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to give the clarity on this. As members will know, on the 2nd of August, I issued the planning advice note. I am satisfied that the policy approach provided by the SPSS remains robust and fit for purpose. But there have been challenges in terms of interpretation of the application of this policy. And so I decided to bring forward this planning advice note to reaffirm my commitment to sustainable development in the countryside and to clarify and support its implementation. The whole purpose of this was not to add to, and this is an important point, it's not to add to or change the existing policy or guidance. And ultimately, of course, councils as local planning authorities are responsible for weighing up the material considerations as they process individual applications. So ultimately, authority resides with them. But this was around just clarifying it is in no way changing the policy or the guidance.
Okay, thank you. Could I go to Andrew?
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome to the Minister and Katrina and Jeremy, and well done to Katrina in her time at the Great North Run on Sunday. The important issues first. So hopefully
it was nearly as good as a Larn, Andrew.
Well, hopefully you enjoyed it. Just a couple of things just around planning. Obviously, the original timescales were for the publication of the review of the 2011 Planning Act before the summer recess, and we've missed that. And I just want to understand the reason for the delay in publication of the review of the 2011 Planning Act, and sort of quite related to that, you've touched upon it in your comments, but it's quite a key issue in terms of the review of that, is in relation to statutory consultees. So you've seen the recent statement from Hagan Homes, who've made a decision to now looking at sites in the north of England and the Republic of Ireland because of our planning system. And one of the comments from James Hagan was that some consultees have a minimum of a 65-day turnaround to see if a new site has available sewage, for example. But in Scotland, the same service will come back to you in 5 days. That's the difference. So to someone understanding in terms of this review and the appetite for change, are we up for significant change in terms of ensuring that the statutory consultees turned around their responses much, much quicker? And some of the suggestions as part of the feedback in the 2011 review was in relation to mandatory timescales or in relation to financially incentivising the statutory consultees, because to me there's originally significant applications, but also there's major applications. And if we don't get real in relation to dealing with the statutory consultees, we're never going to be able to make real progress in relation to planning applications. So that's sort of my first question.
No, thank you, Mr Muir. And in terms of the review of the Planning Act, of course, the committee requested the extension in terms of the consultation period, which we agreed to. So we extended the consultation period from what we had originally intended. We elongated it to give people the opportunity. We also have seen a significant volume of responses to the Act, and a lot of it has been free-flow text as opposed to responding to the questions. So that has made analysis just a bit more challenging, but officials are working through that, and my planning officials, indeed my chief planner, I understand is due to come before the committee later this month, and he can take you through all of the intricacies of that, Andrew. In respect of the statutory consultees, it is a challenge, and I'm going to be honest about that, and we need to get better. There's an issue around capacity, there's an issue in the volume of applications that are being received, and there's also an issue around the complexity of the applications that are being received. That's why that piece of work is being undertaken by a senior official in the department, working right across government and across all of the statutory consultees to improve times. I also continue to meet with CBI, IOD and others to hear their views on how they think we should be improving the planning system, because it is something that we absolutely need to do.
Yeah, I think the other issue is that there's a climate summit which was agreed by the executive. I just want to have an understanding whether planning will be on the agenda for that, and whether yourself as Minister and the Department do whatever it takes to address the issues that are outlined here, but also take into account the issue of climate change and the impact that's having in relation to planning as well.
Yeah, no, and I was really pleased that every minister around the executive table agreed to the proposal to establish the climate summit ahead of COP26, because I believe we absolutely are running out of time. We need to set out our radical action plan to just transition to net zero. And we don't have any time to wait, because future generations, current generations, are going to look back and say, you knew this was happening, you were destroying the planet, and you chose to do little about it. So it is a big priority for me, because it is obviously cross-cutting. The Climate Summit itself is being taken forward by the Executive Office, and so I have written to ask, about the format, and obviously I've received a number of correspondence from stakeholders, young people in particular, who want to get involved in that summit and make their views known. So I'll continue to pass all of those on to the Executive Office so that we can get that ahead of COP and set out our plan. In terms of planning, I'm not sure, because I haven't yet seen the format, if that will be a particular stream, but certainly under the SPS, I'm very clear that sustainable development has to be front and centre, and certainly my view of the Infrastructure Commission that the Executive has now agreed to is one that it should be committed to inclusive and sustainable economic growth and development.
Thank you, Minister, and I think this is really, really important, and you've spoken about it with passion, and I share that. In relation to statutory consultees, I think there's a real frustration, and I'm going to air it here. Some of the statutory consultees are within your own department, and there is a feeling from applicants that sometimes when the consultation is going out to some of the statutory consultees, it's disappeared into a black hole, and it goes in a bit of a circle. So there's a real need, even for the department, to be able to tackle this. And I understand the resourcing issues, but part of that then is whether a proportion of the plan application fee then goes to the statutory consultee to incentivise, because some of these applications are they're taking years, and it's putting people off. And there's a big discussion in other parts of the British Isles and across Europe around housing and about the need to be able to drive development and build. But the planning system in Northern Ireland doesn't facilitate that. And I think there's a real need to be able to deal with that. And I don't know if there's any more that can be said in relation to particularly sort of roads and what's going to be done around that.
I think, just to add to Andrew's comment, statutory consultee, there is the unanimous feeling across the board that is actually what's happening, and unfortunately some of them are within the Minister's remit, that what is happening is a lot of the consultees are running down the clock on their time, and on the day before their time is due to expire, are simply then writing to the proposed developer seeking additional information, which sets the clock running again. It's not a sustainable approach. I would agree with Andrew entirely on that.
Okay. I don't know, Katrina, if you want to come in on that, but the other thing that I would say as well is, when we're having this conversation about planning, we also need to have the conversation, maybe not here because of time, but around our water and wastewater infrastructure, because that also is a huge impediment to housing development and others as well. So it is something that we need to be very mindful of as well.
Yeah, just to add to the Minister's points, we publish every year the performance of statutory consultees, and Andrew, you're absolutely right. Two of the main ones sit within the department itself, so I'm very aware of the fact that it's very hard for me to criticise others when our own performance needs to be improved. The volumes are immense. The resource requirements are hugely significant, and I know that officials throughout both roads and rivers do their absolute best, but I don't doubt that we have quite a bit to go in terms of improvement. In fact, when I came into the department, one of the things I did do was commission a review to look at the performance of statutory consultees, and as the Minister says, that's what gave rise to the planning forum and the work streams we have in place. I'm not going to lie, it's challenging. The volumes of applications, as the Minister has articulated, the quality of many of the applications is a big challenge. The performance is good, but it's not as good as it could be, and it's not as good as we would want it to be in terms of the economic potential of planning, but it is something that we keep a much closer eye on, I would say, over the last couple of years than I think I've seen in the past, and we continue to do everything we can, but I absolutely have no room for complacency here.
Yeah, okay. I think just you've been good enough to give it time, but just to conclude this, I think in relation to quality of applications, this is where the review needs to be tackling this and ensuring that if a poor application goes in, sometimes they're put in to then work through the issues.
Correct.
Okay, that needs to be knocked back at the very beginning, at the first hurdle. Just one last thing you mentioned around the Infrastructure Commission. I was glad to see the Executive had agreed to progress that. But as yet again, we have a situation where there's no progress in this, because then we have to be able to get it established. It has to be put onto the executive agenda. And I want to understand where the blockage is now to get this going. We have a Fiscal Council and a Fiscal Commission already set up. They don't have statutory footing, but they've been able to start the work, and I would be happy with that as an interim option. But why the stalling now to be able to get this Infrastructure Commission up and going? Because it's a no-brainer why we shouldn't get it established.
Well, I absolutely agree. It's a no-brainer, and after the Ministerial Advisory Panel produced their report, I undertook extensive engagement with ministerial colleagues and was joined by members of the Ministerial Advisory Panel as well. And over several months we engaged. I was really pleased that it has appeared in the COVID recovery strategy, and I'm now very focused on setting up the cross-departmental working group to honour the commitment that we have made. Certainly if there's any blockages, they're not on my part. And again this week with the members of the Ministerial Advisory Panel, I met with Minister Lyons, Minister Murphy and Minister Hargay. I'm also on Thursday meeting with the First and Deputy First Ministers, because we cannot afford to wait any longer on this. We need to get on with it. We've gave the commitment in the COVID recovery strategy. Now we need to make it happen. My view is that the cross-departmental working group should bottom out issues around governance and other meat and bones on this particular issue, and that then we should be bringing a report back to the executive with a series of recommendations in a short time frame and get on with establishing it. Otherwise, we're falling behind. We continue to fall behind in terms of our neighbours, in terms of economic advantage.
Okay, thank you. We are running over on this particular topic, but it's important to members, so I'll go to Dolores Kelly, then Roy Beggs, then Cathal Boylan.
Thanks, Chair. There's an unfortunate phrase which coroners' courts have learnt in terms of the PSNI in dealing with disclosure, and it's called a slow waltz. And it does seem to be the case, I have to say, that road service in particular, in terms of being a statutory consultee, NIW, I can understand the particular dilemmas around funding, etc., but certainly road service do need to pull their socks up in terms of responding to these. So I do concur with the Chair's remarks, and indeed with Mr Muir's. In terms of enforcement, that's another issue. I know it crosses to local councils as well, but that's another issue where there's a lack of resource and development, and some people are living in horrendous circumstance with the lack of enforcement taking part, particularly those who are living beside with scree beds and stuff, screening businesses for which there's no planning permission granted. But Minister, you also talked about the plan, and I'm grateful for the clarification around the planning policy in rural areas. But I would urge the Department to consider rural planning policy in light of the ongoing after effect of COVID, the challenges in terms of change in demography and social care, where more and more families want to be close by to provide either care for an older the older generation members, or indeed sometimes the grandparents being able to assist with childcare arrangements for the younger. So I do think it's long past time we did start looking seriously at some of the particular challenges in rural communities in order for them also be sustainable in going forward. Minister, you will be, I'm sure, shocked to learn out Business Committee yesterday. I'm sure all members will be. First week back at the Assembly, executive business for next week. The week after next, there's no executive business currently tabled before the Business Committee, and I would hope you would take that back to your executive colleagues as something that the SDLP is particularly concerned about at Business Committee. But can I just say then, Minister, in terms of the Infrastructure Commission, why is that not, and does it need to become before the floor of the Assembly, or is it just something that needs to be dealt with at executive level?
Well, I'm very grateful for the support that I've had across a number of parties in terms of the establishment of the Commission, and now it is a commitment in the COVID Recovery Task Force. Because I want this to be about infrastructure in its widest sense, it then will cut across the remit of a number of ministers. So you have digital infrastructure, for example, energy, which falls under economy, housing under DFC. So as it is a cross-cutting issue, it needs to come before the executive to secure the agreement to establish the cross-departmental working group. Now, following my engagement on Thursday with the First and Deputy First Minister, I can see no reason why at the following executive meeting we would not be able to agree that and to get that work up and running.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Roy Beggs.
I would congratulate the Minister for driving this issue forward. It's certainly important to have an infrastructure commission, and lessons have been learned from other places, particularly the one in the UK, and there's one working in the Republic as well. With giving better long-term investment plans, making more efficient use of resources, and looking at long-term carbon implications. Now, so I do hope, like my colleague, that it will be put into a firm footing by the executive at the earliest time. But my question is, with COP26 coming up and the importance of looking at long-term carbon, etc., and this will drive it forward as well. Will you be reviewing your roads building infrastructural plans given that some of the roads on it have very, very low volumes of traffic and could not possibly justify the scale of build that has been planned?
Thank you, Mr Beggs. And you mentioned the importance of decarbonisation, and you'll know that I've invested significantly in terms of low and zero emission in terms of our public transport network, and I remain committed to doing that. In terms of road building, I mean, the projects that we're taking forward are executive flagships. And we're continuing to do that. They are executive flagship. I have progressed a number of schemes around bypasses, but what I've been saying very clear is that it's not about building roads, it's about breathing life into places like Balnahinch and others, so that you're creating livable spaces where people are able to walk, wheel and cycle. And so while we're taking that piece of work forward, in parallel we're also looking to see what we can do for active travel and people-centred place shaping in those areas. You will also be aware of the work that I'm doing around active travel as well. So, the highest level of investment yet in active travel and in greenways, and I'm very much committed to doing that so that we can have the modal shift. You'll also know about the document that we published at Time for Change in terms of the hierarchy of transport as well. So we're very committed to ensuring that sustainable development and sustainability is at the heart of what we're doing, whether it's the public transport network, whether it's planning, or the issue that Ms Kelly mentioned there about rural communities, because I actually think this is an opportunity with remote working and the changes of COVID to be breathing life back into our villages and into our town centres as well. So, that's what I'm committed to doing.
Okay.
Do you accept that with the Planning Commissioner's intervention in some of your schemes, that and given this new environmental drive and carbon issue coming to the fore, that those concerns that have already been expressed are likely to increase rather than decrease?
Yeah, and I suspect that the member's referring to the A5, and he and I have had a number of engagements on that particular issue. And I've accepted the Commissioner's recommendations, and we're working through those, and we're carrying out a piece of work around the additional environmental information, because we are very mindful of that, and certainly I am as Minister. The member will also know that the decision that I took around the short, sharp external review of York Street Interchange, that's to make sure that that scheme is fit for purpose, that it's modern, that it meets the bolder Belfast vision, that it's mindful of the fact that we're in a climate crisis, and that we're looking at the active travel opportunities there as well. So I'm certainly not going to shy away in terms of the York Street Interchange, for example, and making sure that that strategic project is progressed, but that it's progressed in the right way and in a modern way.
Okay, thanks, and we will be coming on to a lot of those points in the roads infrastructure point next. So I'll go to Cathal Boylan on planning, and then we'll move on to our next issue.
Thank you, Chair, and thank the Minister for her responses so far. And I appreciate that some of the issues will be ironed out after the review in the plan next taking place, and I hope certainly in terms of the consultees and the responses. But Minister, I just want to pick up on the point on the plan advice note, because clearly all of us who represent large rural constituencies, there seems to be a little bit of confusion here in relation to exactly what this will mean. So, I mean, my question would be to you, Minister, would you consider pausing or holding this plan advice for now and go on and fully engaging with local authority to see exactly what the potential impacts would be for rural communities here? Because I do think the interpretation across 11 councils, which should be consistent, may not be consistent. And I do think that there will be major problems here, because it's difficult enough with the caveats that are within the rural policy at the minute, hard enough to sustain rural communities. So I would ask that the Minister give serious consideration to engage with local authority on pausing this plan advice for now.
Thank you, Mr Boylan. And just to emphasise again that the plan and advice note is not in any way adding to or changing the existing policy or guidance. It is about striking the balance between supporting and sustaining rural communities and protecting the countryside. There has been, I feel, some confusion on this. There was an initial Facebook post that was unhelpful and inaccurate, frankly, which I think raised a number of concerns. I want to assure you that we are engaging as a department with local councils on this issue. I know a number of local councils have met on it. They're in correspondence with my department. And we remain committed to working and engaging with them on that, and that's why I'm pleased as well that my Chief Planner will be coming to the committee and then can go into the specific details of this issue with you all. Okay, members, thank you. Cathal, you're happy enough? We will be receiving a briefing on that from the Chief Planner.
Yes, Chair, but I would emphasise that. I mean, every policy document in relation to planning says sustainability, use the word sustainability, and I think if we're serious with sustainability, especially rural communities, we need to have a look at it. But I'm aware that the officials are in again, but I'll take that answer for now. Thank you, Chair.
So I think we have a briefing on the 13th of October, and I think the member and department officials have heard the members' concerns regarding the impact on rural communities, and that's something that we can bear consideration on at a later time. Okay, moving on, members, I want to talk now with the Minister in relation to roads resurfacing contracts. Now, this is an area of particular concern. It was flagged to the committee's attention. I am aware that the committee question now may filter in a direction of going very local in some directions, which is understandable, and I will give leeway particularly to George Robinson, who has been waiting patiently to talk about the needs in Limavady and elsewhere. But firstly, on a higher level point on this, how many roads contracts are currently under legal challenge within the department with contractors? Because from what we're hearing, there is a considerable bottleneck now, given the number of legal challenges with individual contractors.
So the asphalt legal challenges are related to Ards and North Down, Mid Ulster, Omagh and Derry. In response, officials are working apace on an interim strategy, and the pre-market engagement for that commenced on the 9th of July. In addition to working apace on an interim strategy, the department is also working on larger one-off contracts as well, and the purpose of doing all of this is to ensure that we can get delivery on the ground in those areas at the earliest opportunity. So I want to assure the committee that we're taking this issue very serious, and we're working to put measures in place to ensure that we can get resurfacing on the ground in those affected areas.
And has this had an impact on the department's ability to roll out resurfacing contracts elsewhere in Northern Ireland?
No, so at the moment it just pertains to the areas that I've highlighted. I also want to reassure members that in terms of the Roads Recovery Fund and the rural roads, members will know that last year I established the Roads Recovery Fund. It was £12 million. £10 million of that was directed specifically to rural roads, and some 750 locations have benefited from that. Given the success of that and my commitment to tackling regional imbalance and improving our rural roads, I've increased that budget this year to £17 million to the roads recovery, with £15 million specifically directed at rural roads, which is a 50% increase in the funding going to our rural roads. And that's in recognition of the challenges that we're facing. Now, that is not impacted by the asphalt resurfacing challenges, so just to reassure members that that work will continue as well.
Okay, no, and I appreciate that, and actually the Roads Recovery Fund was a much welcome input in terms of injection of vital money into particularly rural roads. Look, this is something that I get day and daily. You know, this is something that I feel a lot of rural dwellers feel that they're neglected because of the capacity on their roads, etc. And some of them have not seen work done in many years. And I think a focus on how we deal with this is important, because the culture has been to date with the monitoring rounds and the late spends, etc., that we're forcing the likes of divisions to push money out at specific times, and essentially actually maybe not at the best time of the year either, in terms of having a long and lasting impact and improvement on road infrastructure, particularly in the rural area. So I welcome that clarity. What I would encourage is there to be an intense period of engagement as to what that looks like in individual areas, because I have a list as long as my arm, I'm sure other members do, about rural roads that are in much need of action. And I think that if we're going to tackle this in a productive way, there has to be a level of prior engagement so that members can input, indeed, well, representatives can input into that process. So can you outline when that additional finance will filter down into actual boots or tar on the ground as such?
Yeah, so in terms of the rural roads funds, divisions have had their allocations, so they're rolling out those schemes. Just to take a step back, because I appreciate this is a really important issue to residents right across Northern Ireland, but the story here starts in 2015, when there was a huge cut to the budget of my predecessor department, and that forced the department then to reduce the service in terms of potholes and others that it was providing. We also are hampered by the fact that we're still operating under single-year budgets. We're basically fighting this issue with one hand behind our backs. So those are challenging, and I continue to make representations around the executive to secure funding for structural maintenance and to secure funding on the resource side as well, so that we can tackle this issue. And I do hope, and the Finance Minister has been given positive implications, that we will be moving to multi-year budgets. So I think that will help to ease the situation as well. In terms of kind of representations from local officials, my understanding is that local representatives right across all divisions have positive working relationships with divisional staff. I have to say, I'm always heartened by the fact that any time we have the opportunity to talk about this, members go out of their way to put on record their appreciation for the staff and the work that they do, because they are operating under difficult financial circumstances. And of course, they live in these communities. They care about them. They're as upset and frustrated by the state of the roads as we are. So I suppose any assistance that the committee could give, and it has done this in the past, and I am thankful for it, support in terms of me making representations to the executive on this matter for funding would be greatly appreciated.
No, and I would like to put on record the engagement that I have had with your senior officials in relation to this area, because I think they recognise also there's nothing that grains members more than continual lack of action on particular roads, because we've heard the horror stories, and I'm sure the Minister has as well, where we have a case where departmental or indeed roads officials go out to roads to mark potholes, and two potholes could be beside each other, but because one measures up in length, it's circled, and one that'll be in that condition next week is not circled. It's not a prudent way of using money or a resource. So I think, given the situation that you've described and how budget cuts led to that type of approach, I think it's now so important that we try to be prudent and also that we use resource in a sensible fashion. Because I think one of the other things that have been brought to my attention is that we have the likes of our roads infrastructure, people going out onto the roads with lorries and have a distinctive amount of fuel, so therefore that they can't finish a round or whatever because they don't have enough fuel in their truck to last them for a day. These are some of the horror stories that, and there may be a bit of hyperbole in some of their descriptions, but the point stands, there has to be a more effective and efficient way on dealing with that rural roads. I don't think it's acceptable to measure one pothole and not the other. I see Katrina nodding. Maybe you have something that you want to add?
Just to say, as an accounting officer, Chair, I absolutely understand the point you're making. On average, it costs 3 times more to fill a pothole and repair it than it would have done to resurface the road and maintain it correctly in the first place. And that's something I'm very aware of. But as the Minister has said, we have 1-year budgets. We do our absolute best, and the guys on the ground and in the section offices do a brilliant job. When we can get the money, they get it out to the very best of their ability. But that concept of multi-year budgets and also the Infrastructure Commission and that long-term strategic view of infrastructure would be hugely valuable to us, because it is a huge frustration, as the Minister says, to staff in the department. We know what a good job looks like, and the guys and girls on the ground know what their communities' needs, and we know how difficult it is when we can't deliver it.
Okay.
And Claire, I would just say very quickly, we have to be mindful as well of the wider context. So, we are very, very mindful, all of us, of the crisis in our health service. To fix a crisis in our health service is going to require a substantial uplift in the budget that goes to health. If we don't get additional money, that means that as ministers, we're going to have to look within our own departments outside of health to see where we can make cuts. So just to say, we need to be very mindful of that wider context as well, because I have the ambition to do all of these things. But as I said, with the financial situation, your hand is largely tied behind your back.
And I'll close on this comment, but we also have to look into the fact that if we are to transform our health service, there needs to be a recognition that many of our rural communities, particularly in the west of the province, if we expect them to travel for health care, there must be the appropriate road infrastructure in place to allow them to do so at safe and effective times. So
Great.
On that, I'll move on now to questioning. So I'm going to go to Liz, then George, followed by Andrew, and then Roy on this.
Thanks, Chair. Just I suppose in relation to the contractual issues, and I mean, obviously, Newry Morning Down is part of my constituency, and it's one of the ones that are affected. I mean, is there any update on terms of a timeline for the conclusion of the legal case? And I mean, in terms of, and I have been out on the ground with some of the staff in the area, and I have to say they've been excellent. But it's when you can get one or two done, that's brilliant, but I'm just concerned about those roads that are maybe were due for resurfacing. What will happen? I mean, will they not get any resurfacing for the rest of this year? And do we have any sense of how much investment into the areas will be impacted by the legal challenge?
Thank you. In terms of kind of the latter point on the financial implications, we're still working through what that may be. And as I said, we're taking an approach of working to have an interim strategy in place, progress, and that's being made. As I said, the pre-market engagement went out on the 9th of July, and we're also working to have larger one-off contracts for those areas as well, so that we can get resurfacing on the ground as quickly as possible. If maybe Katrina wants to come in the specifics of the time frame for challenge.
Just in terms of the time frame, as the Minister said, we did have to work up a different strategy. The strategy we had for resurfacing was on the best advice available at the time. We can't go through this process of the risk of legal challenge, so we've had to come up with a new approach. I would be very hopeful that we will be able to go to market with competitions this month. We remain on course for that, and really hopeful that that will continue to be the case. And we're doing, Liz, all that we can to get resurfacing contracts on the road. Obviously, as others have said, we're coming into the more difficult times of the year, but rest assured, everything we can do, we will be doing to make sure that we can get as much work and as much activity on the ground where it's most needed.
And just to reassure you as well, I mean, the committee will have received the letter from me, the latest update in terms of the wider issue around kind of procurement and the independent investigation. So the committee will be aware that we have appointed Sarah Hannaford QC to lead the investigation, and Ainsley McLaughlin. And just to give you an update on that, Sarah Hannaford QC is currently scoping the investigation, but we expect that to commence this month, and I will of course keep the committee fully updated on this really important piece of work. Okay, thank you. And thank Liz, do you have a quick supplementary? I see you still on screen.
Yeah, I suppose just on, I mean, that's certainly positive to think that the contract, we could be seeing contracts in this month, as Katrina pointed out. Can I just ask then, those roads that maybe were due for resurfacing that maybe got some patchwork, will that impact on their level of prioritisation? Because that is a big concern for me, that they've maybe got some interim work done to try and keep things ticking over and keep them, I suppose, in a decent state. But will that mean that they're at the bottom of the list, or will they remain, where they were, so that they still get the priority that they need?
My assumption, and I would want to double check this just to be absolutely sure, is that we have the list of resurfacing schemes that we would have been progressing if it wasn't for these legal challenges. What we're trying to do is to get interim solutions in place so that we can get resurfacing contracts on the ground to continue to roll out that list. So if that's not correct, Liz, I'm happy to come back to confirm that with you in writing.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
And just, Chair, we're going to market this month, so obviously there's a bit of a time lag, Liz, between going to market and actually awarding contracts, just in case there's any confusion there.
Okay, thank you. Could I go to George Robinson, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank the Minister and her team for coming before the committee today. I have a few points here, but I'll try to be as brief as possible. The first two would be are two roads issues. We're talking now about the climbing lane between Limavady and Coleraine. That's been in the long finger for quite a few years, and the bypass around Ballykilly, which has been on the long finger for quite a while as well. I do appreciate and realise that these warrants quite a lot of finances, but we always seem to be neglected around the northwest. So I'm sort of battling for the northwest at the present time. Several other points. What sanctions are available to the Department if work is not carried out to satisfactory standard? Now I'm talking now particularly around our area where we have gas being installed and maybe waterworks taking place as well. And the contractors sometimes, not the more, but some of them have a habit of leaving very unsatisfactory work. And is there any sanctions that be taken against these contractors?
Yeah. Thank you.
That's a bit of. I have here at the moment, Minister, and thank you again for even speaking to me last night after the adjournment debate. Very much appreciated.
No problem, Mr Robinson. Just for clarity, we were talking outside the council chamber about local issues that Mr Robinson is such a passionate advocate on. Just in terms, and I know, Mr Robinson, that you have raised the Clyman Lane and Ballykelly with me again very recently. These issues will be viewed under the Regional Strategic Transport Network Plan. That's going to give us an overarching view on what we need to do to improve the road, rail and bus network. And certainly I'm open to taking proposals from yourself in respect of the Climbing Lane and Ballykelly as part of our considerations in that process, because we're trying to take that strategic approach in terms of infrastructure and recognising that we need to be tackling regional imbalance and that our road infrastructure is of less quality in certain parts of Northern Ireland and others, and that's something that I want to work to address. So that will be considered as part of that process. In respect of the utilities carrying out works and disruption to pavements and work that's left, Katrina may wish to come in this, but DFI officials meet on a forum with all of the utilities companies to discuss this. So there's information is given in terms of works that are to be carried out, because often we may have to coordinate some kind of road closure in that. But also following the completion of work, there is an inspection regime that is carried out by departmental officials, and where there are defects, officials in DFI will contact the utility companies to try to get those resolved. So there is an inspection and a follow-up process, Mr Robinson.
Okay. Sorry, do you want to...
No, I was going to say that the Minister's probably said what I would have said anyway, so just to reassure that...
Happy enough, George?
Yeah, could have a small supplementary as well.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead. You didn't get a chance.
Minister, it's I mentioned about Ballykelly bypass, and we've got the former military site, Shackleton Barracks there, and it's Mr McConnell who owns it, and I've had meetings with him recently. And the bypass would be a great help to him, because it's sort of stymieing the movement out and in of that site, where in fact it stops trying to create jobs. He at one time had tried to have the Heathrow hub spin off to the site, but that didn't materialise, obviously because of the COVID situation. But he's very, very keen now to build up other industry in the site, and has been stymied basically by the roads and planners as well. So he did ask me at a recent meeting that we had that he wouldn't mind meeting yourself just to try and iron out and some of these difficulties that he's experiencing.
Yeah, sure. Well, Mr Robinson, maybe if you want to just contact the private office, and then we can see about how best to take that forward.
Okay. Thank you. And George, thanks for that short supplementary.
Thank you very much.
Okay, could I go now to Andrew, please?
Very short question, because I have another question, which is not related to this. But in your response in relation to this, I heard the names Ards and North Down included. And on the 6th of July, in the letter that was received, it said that the areas impacted were Newry, Morning Down, Derry and Strabane, Mid-Ulster and Omagh.
My error. It was Newry, Morning Down, not Ards and North Down. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify that. Okay. Sorry.
Thank you. Roy?
Just briefly, follow up in terms of Infrastructure Commission and roads resurfacing. Would you accept that one of the important aspects of structural investment is long-term maintenance, and that the executive have got that wrong? Because we're not maintaining our roads and we're having to carry out expensive pothole repairs, which just keep popping up.
I absolutely agree with you, Mr Beggs. I mean, it was under Danny Kennedy that there was, that ruthless and deep cut to the budget, and this is the consequences of that. You will also be aware of the Barton report, which identified at 2018 prices a funding requirement of £143 million every year to maintain the road network. Now, every year we're falling short of that because that sufficient money isn't being allocated to the department, and all of that has consequences. We also have the difficulty now that we're seeing extreme weather conditions. And so when we have winters that are extreme and sustained, that also has an impact on our road network. So a number of these very difficult contexts are all combining at this one moment in time. And so we absolutely need to be investing in this. As Katrina said, You know, we need to be getting wise at our investment, and just fixing potholes everywhere. It may be, you know, save money in the short term, but it certainly doesn't save us money in the long term.
Okay.
Quick follow-up there. So the executive has an NDNA road building scheme without the necessary maintenance programme already in place for the existing roads. Would that be correct?
Pardon?
The executive, in terms of their NDNA road building scheme, which is quite considerable, have a scheme in place to build new roads when they do not have a scheme in place to maintain existing roads.
Well, there is a scheme in place to
Not sufficient scheme.
Oh, no, we don't have the funding required, and so this is the challenges that you have all the time. You don't have money to be able to do everything, but if we were to take all of our money and just resurface roads, what are we doing around active travel and the climate crisis? So these are the priorities that you're always trying to weigh up, and that's the difficult decisions and the balance that you have to take when you do not have sufficient budget to be able to do all of these things.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Minister. I have a final question on this from Cahill, and then I know we'll have brief time, but there is some outstanding questions that members might have that aren't related to the topics. So, Cahill, could I have a quick question, please, on this?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just quickly to the Minister, and thanks for all the previous answers. Minister, just in terms of the Road Recovery Fund and what my colleague brought up in terms of the legal challenge, what is the threshold for spend on the road? I mean, on the roads per contract, is there a certain threshold in spend that can be spent now to fix some of the roads that's there? Have you any ideas in terms of the threshold on that spend?
Yeah, so
like, for instance, can you spend up to 10 or 14,000 or 20,000 per contract?
Yep. So just so that it's very clear, the Roads Recovery Fund and the Rural Roads Fund is not in any way impacted by the legal challenges. So it continues to proceed, and what I've done this year is increase the rural roads budget by 50%. That's the highest level yet. So that is not impacted by any of the legal challenges at present, and that work is continuing at pace, and those schemes are being rolled out. Last year, when there was £10 million specifically directed at rural roads, we were able to make improvements at 750 locations. So we've increased the budget by 50% this year, and so we would like to see many, many more locations right across the north benefit from the Rural Roads Fund, not hindered by any of the other issues that we've been discussing.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. So, briefly, members have an open session now just for the finishing of the session in relation to other topics. So, firstly, could I just ask one, which is in relation to the bus and coach sector? The Minister indicated in her correspondence with us over the summer that she'd met with the industry, and there was some, maybe it's too early to say, but there was some talk of a potential further financial assistance scheme. Has the Minister any update for the committee in relation to those conversations?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So, as you say, I met with the representatives of the private bus and coach industry, and I'm keen to do what I can to support them. Members will know that the Tourism Recovery Strategy under the Department for Economy has committed to an escorted coach and private tour support scheme. So I have written to Minister Lyons to ask for an update on that and to offer my assistance as well in terms of working together to ensure that we can get support to the industry, because I'm very mindful that this is a particular industry, given the role that it plays in tourism, that has been very hard hit and will continue to be hard hit for quite some time. So I'm very keen to work with the Minister for the Economy. My understanding is that they are working through the business case of that particular scheme, and so I'm committed to working with him to support the industry, and I've asked my officials to continue to make sure that representatives of that industry are kept fully updated on the engagement between myself and the Department for Economy. Okay, thank you. Go to Vice Chair David Hilditch.
Thanks, Chair. Two quick ones there in relation to capital projects. One of them being the Nelson Street project at the West Link there. I know it's in your own constituency, but there has been some delay on it for some time now. I know there was extra consultation taking place in the spring/summertime there, but as we enter the autumn, is there any movement on that at all at this stage?
Yeah, so do you mean the York Street interchange?
Interchange,
so
yeah.
And under the York Street interchange, we had that short, sharp external review, and I accepted all of the recommendations. What has been happening is that there's been engagement with stakeholders, particularly local stakeholders as well, and I'm expecting to receive a report from them in the autumn, so very shortly, and that will then allow me to decide on the next step. So I do want to reiterate my commitment to that scheme, but I want to absolutely make sure that it's fit for purpose and that it works for those those who use it, but also those who live around it, because they feel very, separated from it, and it has been a blight, if you ask me, in that community, cutting them off from opportunity.
But there's no opportunity today to give us a timeline then, since you've agreed to most of the...
I'm not aware of what's going to be in the report, so I need to wait to see the substance of the report that I'm due to get and then decide on next steps. Okay. But I'm determined to press ahead with the right project. Yeah.
And the other one in your own constituency for the glider,
yeah.
Shore Road or Antrim Road?
So that's gone out to consultation, and I really would encourage people to make their views known, so that we can get that feedback, that we can listen to people, and that will help to inform the decision around the routes in North Belfast.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Andrew?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank the Minister and for Katrina and Jeremy for coming here today. There's a significant amount of work underway and real pressures from the Department, but real focus on delivery. We also don't have our budget confirmed for next year, and I'm conscious that is going to inform a lot of decisions. But yet we have one party talking about collapsing institutions within the next number of weeks. I'd like to have an understanding from the Minister about what the impact would be if the institutions did collapse in the next number of weeks.
Well, my view on that is that we have a health crisis. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and we have a health crisis where we have thousands upon thousands of our citizens suffering on waiting lists. We have a housing crisis, and all of us as elected representatives are very aware of that we have constituents who are homeless, with families trapped in hostels. We also have increasing numbers of people living in poverty right across all of our constituencies, and we have a climate crisis. So it's not even about looking to see what we're not going to be able to do in my department under its statutory responsibilities, and I know they will continue, but the transformative piece of work that a minister would drive in tackling the climate crisis, all of that work would fall. So my view is that citizens are looking to us at this hugely difficult time to be stepping up and not walking away.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Could I go now to Liz Kimmins?
Thanks, Chair. Probably a list of stuff, but I'll keep it brief. I suppose, Minister, you'll not be surprised that I'm going to raise the issue around the proposal from your bid in Lisburn Chamber for a pilot traffic scheme for on-street parking. And I think it's safe to say that there's been widespread disappointment in the response to their proposal, and also they presented to the committee just before the recess. I mean, I think it's evident we're all supportive here of getting more people to cycle and use public transport, and a pilot for 1 hour free parking in Uri would be a happy medium for supporting businesses and enforcing parking, because I think local business would be delighted with cycle lanes, green spaces and things like that, which would actually encourage people to depend less on their vehicles. So I don't think anyone's looking at free for all, but I would just ask, Minister, I mean, in relation to the CPZs, is there any evidence that have led to less cars and better traffic management compared to areas that don't have CPZs? Because the department has made many claims about the benefits of the CPZ, but not to my knowledge, there's been no evidence shown in relation to this. And I would ask if the committee could be provided with evidence of these benefits. And just in addition to that, would the department then commit to a review of the situation? Based on the response and the feedback from businesses on the ground who are experiencing this every day, and potentially look at granting council more power over parking in their own district, as well as the issue of mismatched enforcement across the north. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I've been engaged in substantive pieces of correspondence on this matter. I suppose I would start off by looking at the master plans for both cities, and very mindful of Lisbon's, which sets out an ambition to make it a walkable, livable city. I'm also very mindful that we need to be getting people out of cars. And if we look at successful cities around the world, there are those that are making place shaping safe and accessible for people. They want to be able to walk about, to shop. We have the issue of parklets as well, which I think can be hugely transformative. I'm also mindful of the fact that the overall percentage, when we look at car parking spaces in Newry and Lisburn, for example, the percentage of that that's on street is very, very small. So I'm just wondering about kind of the benefit that it would derive about trying to get new customers in and retain customers. And then I'm also conscious of the fact that councils and the vast bulk of parking is on council-owned sites. So I'm sure that this may be an issue that the council wants to look at. But what I have said, going back to those who have written to me on it, is that there is a parking strategy that councils should be working up, and my department is working closely with them, and we're happy to examine this issue within that context.
Okay. Thank you, Liz.
Quickly. I mean, the council strategy is a longer-term plan, and I mean it's going to be at least 2 years before we see anything in relation to this. What the traders in my certainly in Uri here have proposed is about a pilot. Look at this as a possibility. We're not looking at free for all. They're looking to make a decision based on evidence, and that is all they're asking for. I don't think they'd be raising this if it wasn't an issue. And I know myself, our office is on one of the main streets in Uri, and I know the amount of people that call in that have got a parking ticket for, maybe had to run into a shop, didn't have the change, things like that. Whereas if we had an hour free, that would really alleviate a lot of that and encourage people to come in, shop and move on, and where there may be longer, there is parking available for longer term stays. So I think it's something the department really need to seriously consider.
Okay.
Well, we're happy to write you to set out kind of the evidence and the rationale in terms of, the benefits and the disadvantages of going down this route. I'm happy to share that and to provide examples of other cities around the world that, are breathing life back into their city centres in a post-pandemic era and how they're benefiting from that. So more than happy to do that, Liz.
Okay, thank you. And I know we are in borrowed time, so I do have a final question indication from Roy Beggs and Dolores Kelly. So go ahead, Roy.
Minister mentioned issues involving Northern Ireland Water, and in particular there's a backlog of sewage investment needed to enable development to occur in those areas. Now this is one of the things that is limiting COVID recovery, because there are additional costs of anybody who wishes to develop either a business or housing area and provide their own sewage system. So my question is, are there discussions going on at executive level with the Finance Minister to resolve the long-term funding of Northern Ireland Water?
I'm sure, Mr Beggs, that the Finance Minister is sick and tired of me talking about Northern Ireland Water and sharing correspondence in respect to that. I was pleased and welcomed the fact that I was able to give a sufficient allocation to meet the funding requirements as identified by the utility regulator. That's the first time that has happened in a long time. But in order to address these issues, that needs to be sustained going forward. And
increased, because the figure has ramped up.
Yeah, so I will continue to make those representations. I've no doubt whoever is my successor will continue to do it. And it's not just a matter for the Minister for Infrastructure, it's a matter for the Minister of Health. If we don't have access to clean water and we're not able to invest in our wastewater infrastructure, it's a matter for the Minister for Communities if they're ambitious about building homes. It's a matter for the Minister for the Economy if we're going to be able to maximise our economic potential and our developmental potential as well. So it's an issue that if we don't address sufficiently, we are not going to be able to deliver on our programme for government if we can ever get that agreed.
Okay, thank you. And Dolores Kelly.
Thanks, Chair. Minister, I noted that you met recently with Minister Eamon Ryan, and I'm very pleased to be able to welcome you tomorrow to Lurgan in relation to rail connectivity. I just wonder, could you give us some indication of the next steps in terms of that? And also, I have to say, Chair, as a member of the Policing Board, I'm very disturbed by recent rumblings in the press in relation to the failure of the PSNI to engage with your department in relation to the removal of a bonfire in Tigers Bay. I just want to hear what your response is to those matters that the police have raised.
Yeah. Maybe if I deal with the second issue first. It was deeply regrettable that as a minister and a responsible landowner that we had to find ourselves in court. This was a bonfire on an interface site, and there was significant amount of work undertaken to try to find local resolution, while at the same time there was significant incidences of antisocial behaviour having to be endured by residents. And we did try to find local resolution. Unfortunately, that wasn't possible, and so we asked the PSNI to support us as a department in terms of being a legal responsible landowner in engaging with contractors on the site. I'm deeply concerned that the PSNI was not able to act on that request under the threat of loyalist paramilitary violence. There was a threat of petrol bombs, there was a threat that police officers and contractors would be shot. And I think we have a big challenge as a society. We need to stand up to people who are threatening violence, wherever that threat comes from. And we need to stand together to do it. And I'm deeply disappointed that there was other elected representatives who chose to go to that site and who chose to then criticise me as a minister for living up to my legal responsibilities and standing up to the threat of loyalist paramilitary violence.
Well, Chair, as a matter, I will certainly be raising at the Policing Board and elsewhere.
Okay, thank you.
Rail connectivity, Chair, sorry.
The rail connectivity point.
On rail connectivity, so this is an exciting piece of work, and this is about looking at our existing rail infrastructure to see how it can be improved. It's about looking to see where we can have new rail connections across the island. It's about looking to see the opportunities for freight and rail, which is key if we're to tackle the climate crisis. And it's also about looking at rail connectivity to our international gateways, so our ports and airports. Just last week, I had a meeting with Minister Ryan and the consultants who are taking the review forward. And so their aim is to report back with a series of recommendations, evidentially based, to ministers within a 12-month period. But as part of that, there will be a public engagement and consultation. And I just think that this is, this will be a transformative piece of work. Our rail is an untapped opportunity on our island, and it's key in terms of not just connecting people, connecting us to business opportunity, but also tackling the climate emergency.
Okay. Thank you. And I don't see any other. Oh, I see George Robinson for the final question of the day.
Finally, Chair. Water and sewage, and I know Roy Banks has touched on it, and we have the same situation here in the Limavady area. We desperately need an upgrade because it's stymieing so much new development, so forth, new housing, and it's long overdue as well. And just to remind the Minister that the Open Golf Tournament is coming back to our constituency in the next few years. And that's why I've raised so many roads issues. So I hope she will take issue with that and try to get those roads issues that I have mentioned resolved as soon as possible.
No, and I'm happy to continue to engage with Mr. Robinson on those issues.
Okay, thank you.
And street lighting as well. The outages and street lighting.
Okay, I think another quiet conversation with you and the Minister is required, Mr. Robinson, on those issues. But listen,
I think you're right.
Can I take the opportunity on behalf of the committee to thank Minister Mallon, Ms Katrina Godfrey, Permanent Secretary, and indeed also Jeremy Logan for coming before the committee and for an extensive session of questioning. No doubt these issues will continue to rise as we go through the rest of this session. And again, there is some areas of concern that the committee have pointed out, which we will continue to probe at. But again, thank you very much for your time, and I wish you well for the rest of today's business.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members.
Thank you.
Okay, members. Okay. Can I thank members for their attitude in relation to that question? I actually think that was very effective.
We got done by 12, which is really good.
Yeah, it was succinct. Everybody got their say, I feel. I don't think anybody that requested to contribute wasn't given permission to do so. And we kept it focused. And I think that was more beneficial to everybody because we could have easily been on repeat right throughout this session, so it's important that we use it to the best of our advantage. So thanks, members. Is there any follow-up from the briefing that members would like us as a committee to take up directly? I'm thinking particularly around, we can request, and Cahill had pointed this and so would I, in relation to the specifics on the number in the backlog for drivers and vehicle testing, and also the time, the average waiting time for an MOT test. I also think Dolores Kelly mentioned a point which I think we should be writing to as well, the unfair nature of those that are in the system, fail a test and buck to the back of the queue, and then actually the anxiety that creates in terms of trying to build your confidence for a future test. So we can include that as well. That's on that issue. I'd be happy to do so. In relation to the taxi one, I think we will also follow up with a letter encouraging a continued conversation surrounding the testing element. I know the Minister's released a reform package there that should help the industry, but we've already agreed to write to the taxi industry to see what measures they can put in place. But also we have to take into account the complexity of testing was raised with us, and the Minister did give it a commitment that they would continue to look at that. On planning, members are content that we are going to have a briefing from the Chief, and I think that's a very interesting session. What I would like to do beforehand, and I think Andrew's point is very valid, we have to home in as a committee on the statutory consultees and the length of time that it's taking, and by using statutory consultees periods as a way to basically
Slow waltz.
Yeah, well, yeah, and wait to the very end, and then another request for further information, which could take another 60 days in some of the behalf. So I think that would be important for us to get some of the statistics to the committee before we meet with that chief planner, and how we can effectively question him on that. I also think it would be good for us to write to all local authorities in relation to that local planning policy statement to see what their views were and what their interpretation of the minister's letter was, because there is a bit of ambiguity between different councils as to what their interpretation was. So I think that would be good, because we've already raised. We could also highlight in that letter our concerns surrounding its impact on rural dwellers, as has been mentioned.
Chair, just on the particular one about, I'm not too sure where the
Hold on a minute,
where the responsibility falls, but there's significant concerns. I'm sure you're getting the same at local level in terms of local councils. And first off, their lack of engagement with applicants, how difficult they are to get correspondence or a phone call from, and secondly, the backlogs at local councils. I don't know whether it's probably not that, but it is an issue. It's an issue,
and I think that's going to become more relevant as we start to talk and investigate the planning issue in general. So I think that will come up. And the last point. Yes, sorry, Cathal Boylan, you'd wish to come in on that point?
Yeah, Chair, I mean the 2 points, but the point, the issue on the planning one is definitely challenging for us, because we all know that each council area right across the board has interpreted different ways the policy. So it hasn't been consistent across the 11 councils, and we all know that, speaking to different councils. And I certainly would like to see that followed up. The other point, Chair, that I would like to see followed up on is the issue, those roads contracts, and I asked the Minister, now she did answer some of it, but we need to know what's the threshold. But there's 4 council areas that there's issues over contracts, so we need to know the threshold as to what can be spent and what can't be spent. And I'd like that question asked of the department. I mean, can they go up to £15,000 contracts, £20,000 contracts? Because clearly there's a number of roads out there that may not be getting done because of those contract challenges. And I'd like more information in relation to what's been done and what can't be done in terms of that. Get the committee support for that.
So, Cathal, just clarify what that question would be again, because you've lost it.
It would be the question would be in relation to the threshold to spend in terms of a contract. So, the Rural Recovery Fund, I think, done something like 400, or what the Minister said, so many roads done in the past. Those contracts were up to, I think, something like £15,000 per contract, and I'd like to see what can be spent, because clearly there's issues there in terms of those 4 council areas that have problems in terms of contractual agreements and arrangements. And what I'm saying is, I know there's a number of roads that could be fixed under a certain contractual threshold, and that's what I need to tease that. Now, Chair, if the committee's not happy with that, I'll
that's fair enough. That's fair enough. So that's on roads resurfacing and what we've heard on the contracts. It's a fair, valid question.
Yeah, it's just to clearly define that, because clearly there's areas being held up that cannot carry out some of the works over a certain threshold. I know that.
Your point's taken, and we've noted that, and we will write as a committee. Roy, you had a question?
I'd like to seek reassurance that the maintenance budget globally within the region is being spent and won't be returned because of these missing contracts. If you like, presumably additional resurfacing in other areas, because once new contracts are in place, it'll be possible then perhaps to concentrate in those areas that missed out. But you would not wish that we were not trying to maintain the roads in Northern Ireland by utilising maintenance contracts. I haven't heard sort of clarity on that issue, but I hope that would be the case.
Okay, that's noted. We can include that. David Hillage.
Sure, I know you don't want to bob back and forward, but I've just been informed there that the PSV booking system is down for over a week.
Okay.
So what's the
PSV
system is down for over a week. There was no alternative put in place. And it's caused further problems, but I don't think that was mentioned.
No.
So could we clarify that?
Okay, we can put for a point of clarity on that. Okay, members, you're content on... Oh, sorry,
Yes,
Dolores?
well, it's actually just on the basis of NIW and construction and infrastructure charging the turbocharging the economy. But I just wonder, in terms of writing to the finance, this might be the route to writing to the finance committee, expressing our concerns on the budgetary position, particularly in relation to infrastructure and NIW in particular, and the impact.
Okay, yeah, would do no harm. Okay. Okay, are members agreed with those action points? Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you, members. Okay, can I draw members' attention to agenda item number 10, which is agenda item number 8, which is forward work programme at page 112. Can I advise members that given the short period of time available to arrange a briefing for next week, which had been set aside for the strategic planning, the availability of possible witnesses is limited. However, if members wish to meet, the Assembly researcher is available and able to brief the committee of the research conducted as part of the committee inquiry on the decarbonisation of transport. And we're also looking at other potentials as well. But I know some members were keen to try and meet that day, given that we can't have the strategic planning day. Are members content with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So that'll be organised in due course. Okay, moving on, members, to agenda item number 9, which is any other business, and I have Dolores Kelly for any other business.
Oh no, sorry, Chair, it was any other business with the Minister. That was that.
Okay, right, well, we're happy to... Point arising. Okay, thank you. Any other members with any other business? No?
No, just I think the stuff with the Minister was well structured, so thanks for doing that, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Well, yeah.
Appreciate that. Thanks very much. Okay, and finally, date, time and location of next meeting. So the next meeting will take place at 10 a.m. Depending which is agreed, Wednesday the 22nd. I think that is an indication by members to have that informal or that briefing from the research raise. In room 29, Parliament Buildings, or again, as it was mentioned, if we can't, Wednesday the 29th of September 2021 in the Senate Chamber Parliament Buildings. Can I advise members of the need to maintain social distancing while leaving the meeting and to ensure that they remove all of their own papers, water bottles and glasses, etc. from the meeting room when they leave. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, members.
Thank you.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound.